In early 2026, Chicago plunges into extreme cold as temperatures crash to -22 degrees. A deep freeze strikes the American Midwest, where Arctic air surges far south beyond typical winter boundaries. A city built to endure winter now faces conditions pushing infrastructure and human limits. Simultaneously, daily movement becomes hazardous as extreme cold transforms routine travel into calculated risk. Transportation systems strain as ice and wind chill overwhelm even winter-ready urban roads. Energy demand spikes sharply as heating systems battle temperatures rarely sustained at this intensity. Meteorologists track a deep Arctic outbreak driven by disrupted polar circulation patterns. Events once considered rare now appear more frequently, challenging assumptions about Midwestern winter stability. As darkness falls, extreme cold tightens its grip, reshaping how the city functions after sunset. This freeze is not isolated, but a warning of volatile climate extremes shaping the present. Before the plunge, Chicagoers' winter felt familiar, with cold present but daily life continuing without disruption. The city operates with confidence, shaped by long experience handling typical Midwestern winter weather. Snowfall remains manageable, reinforcing the belief that systems are prepared for winter challenges. Cold exists as expected, balanced within patterns the city has learned to endure. Subtle signals appear in forecasts, suggesting conditions may soon deviate from normal expectations. Homes remain warm, masking the vulnerability that extreme cold would soon expose. Work continues uninterrupted, reflecting confidence built on decades of predictable winter patterns. Nightfall brings cold but not fear, as routines persist across the city. Past winters reinforce expectations that even harsh cold remains within manageable limits. Beneath calm conditions, unseen shifts are already forming far to the north. Far north, atmospheric balance begins to weaken as Arctic warming disrupts long-standing circulation patterns. Scientists observe the jet stream bending, creating a corridor that allows polar air to drop southward. Unusual temperature swings appear, warning that normal winter stability is beginning to break. Over Chicago, subtle changes in wind and cloud patterns hint at approaching disruption. Updated models increasingly agree that extreme cold is aligning towards the Great Lakes region. Cold air advancing over the lake intensifies heat exchange, strengthening the Arctic air mass moving inland. Intensifying winds magnify the cold, driving wind chills to life-threatening levels. Transit systems begin slowing operations as ice and cold strain mechanical reliability. Emergency responders prepare for surging calls linked to exposure and cold-related incidents. Chicago enters a tense pause, moments before the deepest cold tightens its grip. The Arctic outbreak peaks as Chicago is fully engulfed by air far colder than seasonal norms. Temperatures crash to -22 degrees, marking one of the coldest periods in recent city history. Extreme cold overwhelms moving water, freezing the river and disrupting normal human air exchange. Road safety deteriorates as ice persists, despite continuous treatment efforts across the city. Wind chills plunge further, pushing human exposure into immediately dangerous territory. A female voice provides commentary in a news report. Transportation systems struggle to function as mechanical limits are tested by sustained cold. Heating demand spikes sharply, forcing energy systems to operate near maximum capacity. Emergency shelters expand rapidly to protect those most exposed to life-threatening temperatures. Hospitals report rising cold injuries as prolonged exposure becomes unavoidable for many residents. At peak intensity, the freeze halts normal life, forcing Chicago into collective survival.
Residents adapt their movements carefully, as even brief outdoor exposure becomes physically dangerous. Streets fall unusually silent as people retreat indoors to escape prolonged cold. Essential workers continue operating despite equipment limits and hazardous conditions. Commuters face growing disruptions as transit reliability drops under relentless freezing temperatures. Shelters become lifelines, absorbing rising numbers of people unable to stay outside safely. Urban design amplifies wind chill, making exposure harsher than temperature readings suggest. Medical services brace for increasing cases of frostbite and hypothermia across the city. Supply chains tighten as extreme cold disrupts transport and restocking schedules. Vulnerable populations require constant support as prolonged cold increases health risks. As night returns, survival depends on shelter, heat, and collective endurance. Scientists link the freeze to weakened jet stream patterns influenced by rapid Arctic warming. The Arctic warms faster than lower latitudes, reducing temperature contrasts that stabilize circulation. A distorted jet stream allows polar air to surge deep into North America. Historical records show extreme cold outbreaks often follow atmospheric instability. The Great Lakes amplify cold as Arctic air interacts with open water surfaces. Wind chill calculations reveal exposure risks far beyond temperature alone. Infrastructure performance declines sharply when cold exceeds design limits. Climate models accurately reproduce these patterns, reinforcing scientific confidence. Scientists brief decision-makers on why such cold events may become more frequent. Evidence shows this freeze is not random, but part of climate-driven instability. Daily life slows as institutions close to protect people from dangerous exposure. Outdoor work becomes impossible as equipment and materials freeze solid. Energy consumption peaks as households rely entirely on heating for survival. Access to food tightens as transport delays disrupt supply chains. City services shift into emergency mode, focusing only on critical needs. The lakefront freezes, reinforcing the scale and persistence of the cold. Healthcare capacity tightens as cold-related cases add pressure. Public life retreats indoors, leaving normally crowded spaces silent. Night brings heightened caution as residents limit movement after dark. Daily routines adjust to survival rhythms as the freeze stretches on. Older residents face higher risk as cold limits mobility and worsens health conditions. Outreach workers intensify efforts to prevent exposure-related deaths. Families share heat and space to reduce exposure during extreme cold. Medical teams focus on vulnerable patients under sustained cold stress. Community volunteers mobilize resources to meet urgent needs citywide. Demand for assistance grows as cold disrupts income and access to basics. Prolonged cold takes a psychological toll, increasing stress across the city. Educational institutions extend support beyond classrooms during emergencies. Trusted local centers become anchors of safety during prolonged extreme cold. Human stories reveal resilience as communities endure the freeze together. Climate change rapidly warms the Arctic, disrupting the balance that once contained cold air. A weakened jet stream allows Arctic air to spill south in extreme outbreaks. Reduced sea ice destabilizes atmospheric circulation year-round. Disrupted polar circulation sends intense cold far beyond normal boundaries. Midwestern cities sit directly in pathways shaped by altered atmospheric patterns. Climate change increases contrasts, producing heat waves and cold extremes. Scientists agree this freeze reflects instability, not contradiction, in a warming climate. Observations match predictions, reinforcing confidence in climate science. The cause becomes clear, linking Chicago's freeze to broader climate-driven instability.
As recovery continues, attention shifts from emergency response toward long-term resilience planning across Chicago. Risk maps evolve, showing extreme cold now threatens areas once considered comparatively resilient. Older housing stock undergoes retrofitting to reduce exposure during future prolonged freezing events. Investments focus on resilience, aiming to keep essential services operating during extreme winter cold. Water infrastructure adopts higher standards to prevent widespread damage during sustained sub-zero temperatures. Social safety nets strengthen, prioritizing residents most exposed to climate-driven cold extremes. Communication shifts toward clarity, helping residents understand evolving cold risks without creating alarm. Collaboration expands as Midwestern regions recognize shared vulnerability to Arctic cold events. Ongoing monitoring becomes essential as winter behavior grows increasingly unpredictable. The freeze leaves a lasting imprint, reshaping how Chicago prepares for an uncertain climate future. Each winter now begins with heightened attention, as early signals may precede sudden and dangerous cold shifts. Seasonal outlooks increasingly highlight risk uncertainty rather than reassuring expectations of stable winter patterns. Communication uncertainty becomes challenging as public understanding struggles to match growing climate complexity. Awareness now starts earlier, as warnings often arrive days before visible danger emerges. Preparedness becomes routine, integrated into daily life rather than reserved for rare emergencies. Stress testing exposes system weaknesses before real-world Arctic cold can exploit vulnerabilities. Coordination across systems becomes critical as climate threats grow increasingly interconnected. Focused outreach aims to reduce unequal impacts during future extreme cold events. Normal weather now carries memory, shaping how communities interpret calm seasons differently. Each calm season holds uncertainty as climate change reshapes expectations of what winter may bring. Looking ahead, scientists warn that climate volatility may intensify rather than stabilize over coming decades. Projections suggest wider swings between warmth and severe cold across much of North America. Urban planning shifts toward flexibility, preparing cities to absorb shocks instead of resisting single hazards. Housing design evolves to withstand prolonged cold while remaining efficient during warmer conditions. Energy resilience increasingly depends on diversification, reducing dependence on single vulnerable systems. Food systems adapt through research aimed at protecting yields under volatile climate conditions. Economic planning adjusts as climate volatility reshapes long-term risk and investment strategies. Younger generations prepare to navigate a future shaped by unpredictable climate extremes. Cooperation expands as climate impacts increasingly cross political borders. The future remains uncertain, defined by adaptation, motion, and constant environmental change. Memories of extreme cold remain vivid, shaping how communities interpret new winter warnings. Events once separated by generations now appear within single lifetimes, signaling accelerated climate shifts. Each extreme event becomes a lesson, refining preparedness and response strategies for future cold outbreaks. Audits ensure infrastructure evolves alongside climate risks, rather than lagging behind them. Leadership focuses on preparedness without alarm, balancing realism with reassurance during uncertain winters. Preparedness shifts from theory into habit as families adapt to changing climate realities. Early education builds confidence, reducing fear when extreme cold conditions return. Shelters prepare in advance, ensuring support is ready before it is urgently needed. Cooperation strengthens as regions recognize shared exposure to Arctic cold events, and calm conditions mask underlying risk, reminding communities that preparedness must remain constant.
As the freeze fades, its impact reshapes how Chicago understand climate risk and resilience. Life resumes carefully, guided by awareness that extreme cold can return without warning. Scientific conclusions confirm that instability, not contradiction, defines a warming climate system. Investments in resilience reduce vulnerability, though future extremes cannot be eliminated entirely. Shared knowledge strengthens communities, improving collective response to prolonged cold emergencies. Younger generations carry lessons forward, shaping long-term adaptation through education and awareness. Systems remain alert, recognizing that calm periods may precede sudden Arctic intrusions. Cooperation strengthens regional capacity to respond beyond individual city boundaries. The climate future remains uncertain, shaped by constant motion and adaptation. The story closes with vigilance, as preparedness becomes the lasting response to a changing climate.